G'day mates, Luke Ford here. I got whole new hand grip strengtheners. It's going to be a special show. I'm coming at you with both barrels on the Iran nuclear deal. But first, let's deal with Mitt Romney and the hot dogs, Brindlefly.
Yeah, so I saw a Washington Examiner article over the weekend where I think he was doing a fundraising event, kind of like a casual dinner, and the quote is, in discussing, I think he was trying to connect with the masses. He goes, "My favorite meat is hot dog, by the way. That is my favorite meat," he told a gathering of supporters as they joined him recently for a casual dinner organized by his campaign. "But what, I must ask, drenched in a cold sweat, overcome with a desperation to know more, is the meat that Mitt Romney likes next best. My second favorite meat is hamburger, and everyone says, 'Oh, don't you prefer steak?' It's like, I know steaks are great, but I like hot dog best, and I like hamburger next best." And this is just classic Mitt, trying to pretend that he's the everyman when he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but pretending like you like hot dogs. Like, there's nobody, even a guy who eats hot dogs all the time, who wouldn't prefer a steak. It's just so disingenuous. And this guy almost lost. I think he was. The story was like a couple of weeks ago. I think the way Utah's state GOP convention works is that if like a 60% or 2/3 of the convention members like vote, they can I guess they can lock in the primary candidate, like, or if there's not even gonna be a primary, they just puts his name on the ballot for Senate. But he wasn't able to get that. I think he actually got a minority of votes. Like, this no-name guy, like a state representative, got like 50.1%. I mean, Mitt with all his money and his connections and his name power couldn't beat out some no-name. I mean, it's just crazy.
Hey, Sam.
Yo.
Sam, how are you this evening?
Doing pretty interesting, I suppose. A lot of news today.
Yeah, well,
And Sam, what's the last book you've read, Sam?
Oh man, I was in the middle of reading two. My wife bought me one about the first year as a father. It's like written by a guy who became a dad unexpectedly. And then there was one about having a successful marriage that my sister bought. And I also, more interesting though for the viewers probably, what is it, the 33 Rules of War by Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Cater, what's the last book you read?
well, I'm still reading The Spectacle of the Void by David Peake. The last book I finished reading was, what was it? I think it was, it was Titans Are in Town by Tomislav Sunic.
And do you recommend either book, and why?
Yeah, I recommend Spectacle of the Void. I would recommend it to people that are interested in fiction writing, and specifically horror. The whole book's about the like the history of horror in fiction and the philosophical underpinnings of what makes something horrifying and what makes something most horrifying to people. Sort of the difference between the unseen monster and the guy with the mask who's coming at you with a knife. One of those is clearly more horrifying, and he delves into the reasons as to why. But yeah, Titans Are in Town is an interesting book. It's a novel, actually. It's the first novel that Dr. Sunic wrote, who I've spoken with him on numerous occasions, and he's a really interesting guy.
Who is he?
He was a former Croatian diplomat. I believe he was born in Zagreb in Croatia, and he has a doctorate in political science from the University of California. He gives lectures and writes a lot of books and lots of articles. He wrote the book Homo Americanus, Child of the Postmodern Age.
Oh, yeah, Tom Sunic. Yeah, I met him. I did a public dialogue with him. He's amazing.
Oh, yeah, I think he's fantastic.
And he wrote a novel about horror.
No. That was The Spectacle of the Void by David Peake. No, what Sunic wrote is it's called Titans Are in Town, and it's like this mythological folding over of Greek mythology into modern day America, and it's very symbolic, but it's an interesting novel.
Huh. Interesting.
The main bad guys in the novel are the Saturn, or what does he call them? The Saturnine people, but they're like basically a placeholder for, or the Saturns. That's what they are. So they're like a placeholder for the Bolsheviks. The Saturns are going, like Saturn, the deity who devoured his children, and that's sort of his mythological analogy to what the Bolsheviks.
Brindle, I was about to turn the show back over to you, but I got to use my Jewish privilege here. Cater, Sunic sees communism and monotheism as related, kind of similar totalitarian outlooks on the world, and basically Sunic sees monotheism as the root of all evil. What do you think of his ideas there?
Well, I think that's overly reductive. He doesn't see monotheism as the root of all evil, and he actually gets on people's cases when they say things like such and such is the root of all evil, or such and such is the cause of all problems in society. I've seen him push back against that kind of stuff in discussions and in his writings before. So that's not accurate. But I mean, yeah, they're both fundamentally utopian. Now there are strains of Christianity that are more utopian than others, and just any kind of monotheism, really. But all of the prevalent monotheistic religions today are all, fundamentally utopian. And so, I mean, that's a point of alignment, but also they're almost all fundamentally universal. That is, they're for all people, at all times, in all places, and it doesn't matter the attributions of the people insofar as they follow the creed, which is something that's particular to monotheistic faiths.
Yeah, my question was just going to be, what about universalism? I mean, do you think it's one more than the other? Or they're both important components.
Important components to what exactly?
I guess in his characterizing communism being related to monotheism. I mean, is it the universalism? Is it the utopianism?
It's both. Yeah, it's definitely both. And it's sort of well, they both have not all Christians believe this precisely, but there's another similarity, which is the linear progression of history. So like progressivism has a linear view of history, like it's just on a set invariable trajectory. And most monotheists believe that as well, not just Christians. Islamists believe that too, that there's going to be an end times, and the end times are inevitable, and this particular set of things will occur when the end times comes. And I mean, that's somewhat similar too.
No, that's actually a good point. I guess when we think about the cyclical histories, I guess the Indian or the Hindus have different ages, cycles, and the same with like Mayan civilization. What about like the Eastern? Well, I guess Buddhism's informed by Hinduism.
The Indo-European indigenous faiths also had beliefs that were rather cyclical, even though they had, there was sort of like in the Norse tradition, because I know Mr. Ford wanted me to have some kind of disputation with Ed, who I see has just popped in. I don't know why, but something about paganism. I'm not sure what, but anyways, in the pagan faith, Ragnarok is typically, people have this view that that's like the end of time or the end of the world, but the world is reborn after Ragnarok. It's remade into something new. So it's more akin to the Egyptian faith, as opposed to the Christian faith or the Muslim faith.
Good evening, Babs. What's going on,
Hello.
Babs?
Hi, not much. Just a little bit tired, a little bit out of it. Still recovering from my second sort of completing surgery appointment which concluded my entire sort of operation thing. Anyway, I just wanted to say I think that Cater, you're correct in that monotheism. The two largest monotheistic religions today are truly, in a sense, universalist. But I don't think that that is necessarily something inherent to monotheism. I think it's really something that kind of originated with Christianity, Islam, and perhaps there were a few other groups at the time that had parallel things going on. But even Judaism isn't truly universalist. You can look into Judaism and find some things that could even be interpreted as like potentially perennialist strains of thinking, even like, for instance, in how the Noahide laws are laid out. And there are some Jews who I mean, this isn't the most common view, but there are some Jews who truly do interpret it in a kind of classically perennialist manner. And even the ones who don't, they aren't true universalists about it. There's still this there's room for kind of like different manifestations of unique religions, sort of provided monotheism. But so I just wanted to come in and point that out. But yes, it is true that most monotheistic people today are universalist, and the biggest monotheistic faiths today are universalist. But I don't think that universalism should inherently be tied to monotheism, because Zoroastrianism, some say, some interpret as having monotheistic elements, but I don't think it's necessarily universalist, as it were. And there are probably other examples I can come up with.
Yeah, that's interesting bringing up Zoroastrianism, because that played a big role in the formation of Judaism. Especially in terms of the cosmology, that's where, insofar as I'm aware, I believe that's where the flat Earth, that's what popularized the flat Earth cosmology, that the Earth was flat and it was held up by four pillars, and that's where you get the four corners of the Earth that people say, like I've traveled.
I mean, there are similar There's similar strains running throughout a lot of ancient West Asian sort of mythology, and even more broadly than that, you can look outside of West Asia and you can look at humanity as a whole, and you can find certain elements of perennial symbolism, archetypes within storytelling, or sort of religious history, things about the origin of the world, the nature of God or the transcendent or the divine. So I think that there are parallels there, and while there are parallels there, I'm not sure if it's necessarily the degree to which, which influenced which. I wouldn't necessarily make a judgment one way or another, because there are lots of, for instance, you can even find symbolism in some West Asian religions, and then find parallel symbolism, let's say, in East Asia, or
right. That's a matter for the historians.
Western Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, I seen Mr. Ford put out a message that said we'd be giving our countervailing narratives on the Iran situation, and one of us would be giving a homonormative narrative, and the other one would be giving the heteronormative narrative of the Iran deal.
Someone said Zoroastrianism isn't monotheistic, it's dualistic. Sorry, I just wanted to respond to this comment. And yeah, technically it isn't monotheistic, but there are ways in which Zoroastrianism could be seen to be, if not monotheistic. How do I put it? This isn't a great example, but people say that Christianity and Hinduism are not monotheistic, but in a sense they are kind of semi-monotheistic in the sense of the concept of Godhead. I think that there is I agree, there isn't a fine line either between monotheism and non-monotheism either necessarily, within, if you look at how religions have evolved over time. That's another thing I'd also like to point out.
Right, but so what do you think of the Iran deal, the JCPOA?
I don't know. I mean, I've been following it to a degree. I guess it's just really that I don't.
I'm asking because we appear to agree on the religious issues and the historical background, and Mr. Ford wanted to fight here, and I'm just trying to probe into what we can fight over. But stop being so agreeable.
What's going on? I see. The thing is, I've heard so many different stories on the Iran deal. I'm kind of looking for like an objective, sort of brief, few sentence long summary of what's actually been going on. I kind of know about the context of the Iran deal, but what's going on about like the rejection of the deal and whatnot? Like, who were the actors in this? What was the catalyst, etc.
Yeah, so Iran has been making some threats that we're going to regret it if by we I mean the United States, if the United States throws out the deal, there's going to be serious consequences, dangerous consequences, and Trump's advisors keep telling him to keep the deal. France wants him to keep the deal. Most of our allies want us to keep the deal. I think we should keep the deal because they've been complying with their terms. Now, Netanyahu came up and said that they weren't complying. They were lying. They had the secret military program, and he was doing his big theatrical carnival routine where he had all of these discs that looked like they were from the 1990s stacked up. Like that's what they kept the information on to make it look like they had all this huge database. But of course, you could just fit all of that on a thumb drive or a jump drive. You didn't need this giant stack of stuff. So that was clearly not what they kept it in. It was just showmanship. And as I said,
yeah, Netanyahu's fond of like very literal, kind of like literal showmanship and that kind of.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a big fan of his. I just think he's kind of like whatever. I mean, I get it. Like his brother is cool and stuff. Like I understand and I understand
he's
like
a good
the
talker.
appeal of heroism. I get that, and I understand the appeal of heroism, and I understand the appeal of a being governed by a warrior. But at the same time, yeah, I don't really like the guy. I don't think he really portrays. I don't think he makes my people seem like, a noble, honorable people. I think it's just kind of a bad look. Personally.
Well, yeah. So honorable is what I was just about to talk about. Is that he has a history of lying, and I consider him to be a serial liar because he's just lied so many times. So I don't trust anything that Netanyahu says unless there's independent verification that's coming out of multiple other sources, because there are other vested interests that want to, have some kind of conflagration or start some kind of conflict with Iran. So, but if there's other people, like if, France comes in and the UN comes in and some independent panel from the United States comes in and they're like, well, we can't find anything or Israel's information is inconclusive. Okay, then that'll say something. If they all say it's conclusive, that would say something as well. But Netanyahu said that he was going to share this information with the United States, with various other countries, I think with France, because they're involved in the region, and they've been very vocal. Macron's been very vocal about how he wants to keep the deal, but it's just on the fundamental principles of keeping to our word, we should stick with the deal. Until this so-called information that Netanyahu has is verified, because otherwise you're just like, well, we're just giving more. It's not like the United States is looked upon at all fondly in that corner of the world, and we just keep ratcheting up the tension, and it's very destructive and unhelpful.
Why does Iran want nuclear technology? I mean, I'm curious. Like, I mean, is it for really? Why is it that they really want it? I mean, nuclear power is powerful, and nuclear weapons to the degree that they exist. And I had a person in the chat question me on this earlier, but to the degree that nuclear weapons exist, and it's not just a big conspiracy, I would say that they act as a deterrent. They act as a deterrent, or at least the concept of a nuclear weapon acts as a deterrent.
Hold on. Whoa. To the extent that they exist, is this like we never went on the moon? Moon rocks are fake.
Sort of.
Okay.
I was directed in the comment section of the Luke Ford live stream of, I think, a few nights prior or last night. A gentleman by the name of Balder Blog or something like that told me that there is a chance that nuclear weapons don't actually exist, and that it's all sort of just a big conspiracy and people just sort of make it up because it's a nice deterrent, which it is indeed a nice deterrent. And that yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting.
I'm not sure if I exactly follow
theory
in that train of thinking, but I'm sure he'll appreciate the shout out.
Yeah, well, that's not true though. but okay. But yeah, the reason any country wants nuclear technology is because then you can't be pushed around anymore. Then you have a seat at the big boy table, and then you can say, you're going to include us in your dialogues. You're going to include us fairly in your negotiations, because and you're not going to use any kind of military action against us at all because we have nukes just like you. So we're on somewhat of a level footing. So that's the reason any nation wants nuclear power. The other one is in terms of energy, is that nuclear power is extremely efficient, and we should be using it more in the United States. But this religion of environmentalism, I call them envirocrats, that just care more about this like Mother Earth anthropomorphization of the environment than they do about people. So it's just any kind of change to the environment is bad, regardless of whether or not it improves human life or it's good or whatnot. They just oppose it on principle, which is foolish. But it's a great source of energy too.
Hey, let's bring some queer theory into this. Like, let's suppose.
I was going to say before you do that, we have a super chat. Halsey, $20. Kiter is wrong on the facts. Shekels for Luke, though.
Okay, great. But like, let's suppose like a video got released showing either Donald Trump or the leader of Iran blowing dudes. Do you think that the strategic position of that country would be negatively affected if their leader was blowing dudes on video? Cater, what do you think?
No, I mean, that has very little to do with their strategic position. I mean, that would, it would cause a scandal, but I mean, no, I don't see why it would. But I would also like to know you said the chat was from Halsey?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to know what facts I'm wrong on. I mean, if he's referring to what Netanyahu said, it's just that he might have, correct information. Obviously, it hasn't been released for public consumption, or if it has, I'm not aware of it, and so I haven't seen it. And that's probably not going to happen until it's verified by, someone in their interior ministry, or it's going to be verified, and then it's going to be sent out for external verification. So I'm just reticent to accept any of that on a politician's proclamation. So I don't really know what I'm wrong about.
Yeah. Sarah in the chat says that I was dismissive of Halsey's super chat. Heck no, Halsey is the main funder of this program. So I take my keeper after Halsey. Nothing but respect, and really appreciate the shekels. Babs, do you think that it would have a devastating morale effect if leader of America or the leader of Iran was found to be blowing dudes?
I think it depends on the context. I think that domestically, in the context of America, it would, if, let's say, the president was a homosexual but was open about it, I think that it wouldn't necessarily be that poorly received compared to if, let's say, the president had a wife and was having homosexual affairs. Because I think that America is very, Americans today seem to be very open. And not all of them, but on average, Americans seem to be sort of like, even the ones who don't like homosexuality, they sort of have as long as it's not hurting anyone and I don't have to see it approach.
Well, I think you're right that a man cheating on his wife with another dude would be terrible, but I think most Americans would find, I don't think they would accept an openly homosexual president. In fact, I think they would find it rebarbative.
Well done, Brian. Well done.
Just a little cater posting there.
Well, what I was going to say, that's true. That's true. What I was going to say is that it would be, the cultural context is huge, like Babylonian had said. So if it happened in Iran, it'd be a huge scandal. That guy is not going to be in office, very likely, unless there's, some kind of major cultural shift that just suddenly happens. Like this is the catalyst for revolution. He's going to be done. If it happens in the United States, especially if the guy's single, I don't really think it would be, much of anything. I mean, look what happened with Trump, right? Came out that Stormy Daniels thing. People are still trying to push that. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a damn that he was banging some, slut, and it's just nobody cares.
Banging a slut is different than being a sodomite. Like, I think people
I agree,
are.
but it's a slippery slope.
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
I mean,
That's-
it isn't.
just
It
like-
isn't. It isn't. It isn't. Morally speaking, it is. But in terms of how one might live their own life, there generally are fine lines for straight men. But morally speaking, I agree that it is kind of a slippery slope when you're sort of branching off into just hedonistic behavior.
Well, look, I mean, I'm just saying that, like, 95% of people aren't homosexuals. They can relate to, that kind of, like, some beautiful woman, a guy, the idea of the powerful man, having his wife, a mistress, and a prostitute are like, that's almost par for the course. Like, he's almost like bought the right to do all that. And
That's a really good point. Yeah, they can empathize with the libidinal desire because they felt it themselves. Where it's very difficult to empathize with someone who is homosexual when you yourself aren't, and you're just like, well, I don't know, I can't understand where you're coming from. So yeah, that would certainly be the major point of distinction. I'm not drawing an equivalence between the two actions, culturally speaking. It's just that, like how blasé, because I was surprised by how blasé people were. Like, I knew that the MAGAPede people, that the really hardcore Trump supporters weren't going to care, and that even if it came out that he was being indiscreet or whatnot, they were going to take up the ball for him, like the Bill Mitchell, Jack Posobiec types, because that's what they do. But I mean, even
players.
yeah, the team players, but even many of the people who were just very neutral about it, like the centrist guys, they were just like, it's whatever. So, yeah, I don't think it would cause that much tension. I don't think it'd be a big problem.
So, Babs, I kind of want to ask, if Israel, I know you're not too fond of the state of Israel, or maybe you're just ambivalent about its existence. Do you think, like, war with Iran, if it, like, led to the like the collapse of the state, would that be, like, good for the Jewish people overall? Babs? I think we're having some issues.
Hello.
Babs, yeah.
Are you
Did you hear
talking
any-
about? You're okay. I'm not really understanding the question you're postulating here. Israel, the government of Israel is destroyed by Iran. In a
Yes,
conflict. Is that what you're
right.
talking about?
Yes. Would that be good? Would that be good for Jews?
That would not be good for Jews. I would say probably I would give that, like, the chance of that being good for Jews in the way it plays out is especially good for Jews like me who actually desire autonomy. I don't think it would play out well. So even though I am not a big fan of the current Israeli government, I prefer the current Israeli government to being sort of like landless perma-minority dhimmis who lack autonomy and are governed by imperial powers. I think that we've had more than enough of that. I don't bear any ill will towards Iran or Persians or any of that, and I think this entire conflict is a bit silly, quite frankly.
So you're saying we need to decolonize our minds?
I've always been saying decolonize our minds. I've been saying that since like the day one. Like, I used to be one of those idpol leftists types before I joined the right. I agree. Like, I think that Jews, for instance, have a problem with internalized white supremacy. I can go into this if you like.
Yeah, can you? What does that mean? Internalized white supremacy.
Jews struggle with internalized white supremacy. For example, if you look at Israel, if you look at all the way from Israeli Jews, whether it's Ashkenazi Jews importing these values or Mizrahi Jews kind of looking at these values and kind of fetishizing them or glamorizing them, and this isn't just in Israel, this is in the diaspora as well. So yes, I understand the people who legitimately want to assimilate, but we end up aping the West and ending up as nothing more than kind of like a less cool, crude facsimile is how I kind of interpret what goes on often. For instance, Enlightenment values. And maybe this has like a moral precedent from Judaism or Jewish beliefs or the feeling of being diaspora, but things like Enlightenment values, things like the fact that like Jewish women in diaspora will, let's say, they'll straighten their hair, and the men will cut their hair short, generally, and the women will lighten their dark features often, etc. And although now, like, yes, a more sort of quote ethnic look is becoming more acceptable by beauty standards in America, it's like I still feel as if I don't feel as if and yes, I know that nose jobs are down, for instance, amongst Jewish women. I still feel like we almost, it's a combination of multiple things. One, I feel like a lot of Jews feel like to be civilized, to be technologically advanced, is to be Western and to go whole hog. And let's say, if we want to have an advanced society, we need a parliament, and we need all the affectation and garbs of the Western world, and we need suits and this and that. I mean, I get it, and I understand that. I understand that, like, Jews, even in the Arab world, have been, let's say, wearing suits for a very long time. But it's just like, I don't know. I feel as if Jews are very much we're kind of averse to our own culture, and we fetishize the aesthetics of other cultures. It just sometimes even simply on aesthetic grounds, or sometimes from this sort of instinctual rejection of our own culture as perhaps in some instances primitive, reactionary, overly oriental. This is the critique that Marx made of his own Jewish heritage, for instance. Hebrew heritage, Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, Babs, that's awesome. Babs, you've got a bunch of topics for us tonight, so I want you to lead the discussion like you did on Vice. So why don't you pick one of the topics that you'd like to start with and lead out, and we'll follow you, Babs.
All right, awesome. Let's start up. I love that power collar. So, let's see.
It looks
one thing. Yeah, it does. Like what is it called? The flamboyant cuttlefish. But I want to talk first of all. Something that I find really interesting is sort of. I was reading about this recently, and this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while now. I read an article which linked to a study, and unfortunately I can't find it now. I was looking for it all day. But it talked about how early life, specifically very early life, not just early life until the end of adolescence, but early life until, I'm talking about sort of preschool and the years slightly immediately after and the years prior, that age. A lot of the social experiences and memories accrued during that phase of youth are, in a sense, doomed to repeat themselves in the minds of those who experience them, or rather, everything kind of emotionally is shoehorned into this narrative, which you accrue and pretty much keep for the rest of your life at a very young age. So things like this is where a lot of the kind of Freudian type ideas, I think, come from. And I think that although a lot of what Freud pushed was kind of like quackery and sort of like postulation and assertions and kind of, in a lot of ways, pseudoscience, a lot of what Freud said in terms of, let's say, family dynamics, or the import of family dynamics, or the import of very early life social interaction and socialization with one's peers, those things have a profound effect on how you live the rest of your life in terms of what role you see yourself playing in the world and what role you see those other people around you playing in your own life. I'd like to hear about, I just think it's very interesting because I know once I started reading about this, I noticed that, yes, indeed, I internalized one of these narratives due to my socialization at a very young age. And I'm curious if any of you have noticed something in yourself. And I'm wondering also, is it possible to break this type of pattern? Because I don't necessarily think it is.
Yeah, I think it is possible, and people should study attachment theory. It's absolutely fascinating. So half the population has normal attachment, solid attachment, and then about 20% has anxious attachment, which is what I have. I get so anxious about the quality of my attachments that I will rise from bed at 2 a.m. and check to see if somebody's still my Facebook friend. So I tend to be like way over anxious about my relationships, and that anxiety tends to have a negative effect on my potential for building relationships. Also, other people close to me are avoidance. So they basically try to avoid relationships. And so I'm very keenly aware from firsthand experience the absolute horror show when someone with anxious attachment, so someone who's obsessed about the quality of their attachments, matches up with someone who's avoidant. So the anxious person is constant from the avoidant, and the avoidant is always trying to get away. So it's an absolute horror show. And you can move towards normal attachment level. You can do things to like bring down your anxiety levels, such as gaining mastery. Like if you simply, increase the parts of life that you're good at and become increasingly masterful at various parts of life, you'll feel less anxiety. Also, you can practice meditation. You can do therapy. You can do 12-step work. You can develop a relationship with God. You can put yourself around people with normal levels of solid attachment. By comparison, if you put yourself around people who are even more anxious than oneself or avoidant, then you will go in the opposite direction. You'll go back towards anxiety and avoidance, and you'll have less luck healthfully attaching. And two quick narratives from my childhood that have played out throughout my life. One is rejection. So I grew up in foster care, and so I was constantly being moved from home to home to home in my first 5 years of life. And so as an adult, I felt a strong tendency to recreate that. I'm like always looking to recreate the drama and anxiety of being rejected and expelled. And on the other hand, eroticized rage has played a huge role in my life. And that's basically anger that's been sexualized. And so I have this streak of anger against over-controlling mother figures from my early childhood. And so I've had a streak of anger in me against women in general, which particularly predisposed me to porn, because porn is all about the degradation of women, because that tied into my early childhood narratives of like hating some of my over-controlling mother figures. Eroticized rage is then like developed, strengthened, and it affected vast swaths of my life till I got into a 12-step program to get a handle on it out.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think those are good pieces of advice to get oneself out of these recursive loops of behavior. Because Ed had said, or had asked the question whether or not it was possible to get yourself out of these loops. And I think it is. Anytime you realize you're behaving in a particular way, then you can begin organizing yourself to begin stepping out of these circles that you've drawn for yourself.
I actually just recently, we're planning a trip to Disney World for my son. I mean, really driven by my wife. I think it's a huge waste of money. But she really wants that memory with him. I don't think he's old enough. And the thing I was thinking about was I had gone, he's 4. I had gone when I was 5 as a kid. And the only thing I remember is being terrified by the Pirates of the Caribbean, like animatronics ride. Like that is the only image I have from that whole trip is just the sheer terror. And then that caused me to think of, when you're younger, when you're 10, 11, I remember being able to think back and be able to remember the whole timeline of like my elementary school years. I could tell you what I was doing, like each summer, all those things. And as you get older, you forget the details and you hang on to less and less memories. And I realize the most vivid memories I have are like all traumatic. It's all, not that I really had a bad childhood. It wasn't filled with trauma, but for whatever reason, it's the negative emotions that have stuck with me. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I haven't really ruminated on maybe how that's impacted my life's narrative. I tend to be a pessimist. I think that's maybe part of being a right winger is seeing like the cold reality, the cold negative reality of what can happen in society, not having a blind optimism towards utopian futures. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, what are the strongest memories you all have as children?
Well, for me, it was when I talked about. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
No, please go ahead. And I'd also like to ask a follow-up question on top of that. So while you answer his question, also you should answer mine. And this is for everyone who goes. Were you more of an insider or an outsider with your age peer group growing up? I think that's a very important question for how the rest of your social dynamics might tend to manifest themselves for the remainder of your life.
Well, to answer that question really quickly, clearly an outsider, not an insider, but an amiable one, I think. But for me, it was when I had mentioned previously about shooting, about my grandfather teaching me to shoot. I mean, that was very formative. That was very impactful. Yeah.
Babs, why don't you answer your own question before we move on? Both
Oh.
questions.
All right, I'm going to answer my question, then Brundle's question. So first, Brundle's question. Very impactful moments from my childhood. Impactful moments from my childhood.
I can't hear anything you're saying, Ed.
Oh, sorry. Hello. Impactful
better.
from my childhood. There are several moments that impacted me in a negative manner very profoundly, but I'll look at some of the more positive ones, and I guess that was some of the positive opportunities.
Is there a preponderance of one versus the other? I mean, which ones stick more clearly in your mind?
I think that there was a phase of immense positivity that had a very rapid snap from a very positive, kind of dreamlike cloud nine state of being a straight A student, having a perfect life, etc. And then that all sort of, in a way, and this was probably largely had to do with what was going on inside of my head more so than events going on around me, but it felt like one big thing happening at once. It all sort of shifted for me at one point in my life, and all the sort of foundations of my conception of reality seemed to sort of shatter simultaneously, and I had to that was my first real existential crisis, I guess. That was about age maybe 12 to 14. You
had your first existential crisis when you were 12?
Yeah,
hearing that
there, from like
without knowing anything else about you, I would have assumed you were French.
Well, I mean, and then the other thing is, was I an insider or an outsider growing up? With my peer group, I was always the outsider. But within the adult world, amongst adults, as a very young child, I was quite precocious, and I fit in better with adults than I did people my age for a very long time, which allowed me to make a lot of connections that I still value and treasure to this day when I was a lot younger, when it's in a lot of ways a lot easier to make connections if you show, let's say, ambition or passion in a certain field. So, and then I also had this very interesting parallel experience where I was a student, and I was, fawned after and adored, and a lot of this just had to do with the fact that I was like, a cute little kid with like a Jufro, and I kind of resembled like a little potato of a human being. And I would, like, let's say, go to the Frick collection, and they would have like these sort of like interactive lecture conversation things, and everyone would be like, "Oh, he's so young," and the same thing would happen at a lot of other places within like art and theater and other circles within New York City. So it was a very interesting parallel experience, and that led to a lot of frustration and resentment within me, where I was thinking, if I'm so, I guess, socially gifted and so intelligent as it pertains to adult life, why is it that I'm effectively a blundering autist when it comes to people my own age? And this set the tone for a lot of the rest of my life. Interesting.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I remember having a ton of conversations, like deep political, philosophical. I mean, not that I was that deep about it, but I'm asking big questions, and I'm getting talked to as an adult by my uncle and other people in my family, like in elementary school, middle school. I remember this. I had a great uncle who was actually a hardcore leftist. We spent hours at a family reunion at the fire, like talking about politics. I mean, I was very naive 14-year-old, but the fact is, like, I would engage in that conversation. He would engage with me as an adult.
That's missing. That's really missing from society too, I would say. I'm sorry.
Well, is it though? Because I mean, most of the kids my age like wouldn't even find that interesting. They were focused on kid things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, finding something interesting and something being really, really important are two different things. So there's all kinds of things that I know friends of mine think are really fascinating. They love Marvel. They're all talking about the Infinity War movie that came out and how cool the big purple man that looks like he's from The Simpsons, how awesome he is. So yeah, they're really interested in that. And then they don't care at all about the Iran deal. They don't care at all about civic virtue. They don't care at all about what they're going to do for money to support their the people that are close to them or in their community. They don't care about their community because it's not really, they don't consider the people that are around them members of their group. So these are really important things that parents should engage their kids with, right? I would assume, like, regardless of whether or not they think they're particularly interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here, read some super chats, and we'll get back to it. So, AT, thank you very much for supporting the show. Wants to know if I ever blogged about gay porn. Just a little bit, and I didn't enjoy it at all. So, I mean, I never watched any, and but of course there's some crossover because when you become a professional sex worker, orifices start to blur. So most of the guys in hetero porn were also doing gay stuff on the side. And of course, there was the homosexual porn industry was filled with AIDS. Probably half the performers had AIDS in the gay industry. And then there was a crossover. So AIDS would also transmit into the heterosexual industry. So I covered that. Is my therapist a Jew? So almost all my therapists have been Jews, but my best therapist was a gay Jew, and he was absolutely terrific. But most of my therapists have been Jews. Most of them have been female. I had one therapist who talked about when she went to graduate school. She was Jewish, very strong Jewish identity. And but in graduate school, she was asked to read all this anti-Semitic literature. And after just a day of reading it, she found herself hating Jews. And she was so relieved when that assignment was finished, because just like reading a little bit, just immersing herself for an hour or two in anti-Semitic literature, she found it changing her mind and she became anti-Jewish. But back to everyone else, back to you, Babs, if perhaps you want to talk about, are there any patterns in your first 5 years that have repeatedly demonstrated themselves in your life?
Yes. The area, as I was saying earlier, being very, very impotent in other areas and hyper competent in other areas, and feeling the desire to prove, or to sort of prove or exert that competence over those areas of my life where I either have found myself or currently find myself woefully inept for whatever reason. Let's see.
The thought that I come into mind, did you ever feel like, I know you had a degenerate or a sexually promiscuous phase. Do you think that was like a compensation for maybe feeling socially awkward?
Absolutely. It also happened in that manner because I grew into myself in sort of later in my teenage years, and then suddenly I found myself in this situation, and it wasn't just a matter of overcompensating. I think partially it's overcompensating, but partially it's just the fact that I had been, in a sense, very, very repressed, because I'm a man who generally has like higher inclinations for certain types of like very visceral impulses, and it's like I wasn't able to indulge that for like the majority of time when I was in prep school. I mean, and then when I finally found out that basically not only could I had kind of like transformed, because in my head I was still a very different person, I sort of went a bit crazy with it and blindly pursued what felt good in the moment, which leads people to do very, very stupid things when that is their sole guiding light, their sole North Star is what feels good in the moment. Okay,
Babs, why don't you leave the chat briefly and restart your phone, because your audio is pretty bad. Maybe if you restart your phone, we'll get better quality audio. And someone else want to weigh in?
No, I was going to say, I feel like I had, I always had like kind of female interest from middle school onwards. I mean, I definitely had promiscuous years and times. I don't know if I had the same. I had like more issues like joining a male pack, I would say. Like I would say like in high school I had issues. I was the floater, so I was never like really in a group. Like I had relationships with many different groups, but never actually being a member of one. I mean, Luke, what were you like in high school? What was your
I was much more. Yeah, I was much more an observer throughout my childhood, but the closer I've gotten towards the center, the happier I've become consistently throughout my life. But in eighth grade, I decided to become a journalist. So practicing journalism for the local newspaper or for my high school newspaper was an opportunity for me to observe, and it fit my personality. But as my gay guy therapist told me, to get well, maybe you need to put down your weapons. And so journalism has often been a weapon for me. It's been a way to keep the world kind of at bay, engage with it on my terms. But when I was being able to put down that weapon and join in life, and the closer that I've come to connection and towards living from the very center of life and from the center of communities, the much happier I've become. How about you, Kata? What you've mainly been an outsider, but have you ever been?
Oh, I don't want to go on about any of that. I mean, I'll just bore everyone to tears. But what I did want to remark upon was what you had said about finding your center in communities, and what Ed had said about pretty much the same thing, which is or what he had said about hedonism and people just falling into satiation of the pleasure principle and nothing else. So that's the whole idea of jouissance, of life affirmation outside of the pleasure principle, and that is generally, and you'll get different variations of where you'll find that from different philosophers, but it seems to me that it comes from social attachment principally, because you can't really find your fulfillment or understand who you are unless you have something to contrast yourself against. And so because what people will say, well, what else is there other than pleasure and pain, right? And a lot of people will just say, well, I guess it's nothing. I don't know. And they just won't have thought about it. But, social attachment is not necessarily inherently something that is pleasure or pain. It's empathic magnitude. So that's something that people should take into consideration when they're constructing moral paradigms and vectors for being in their own life.
Cater, why do you feel like your story would bore everyone to tears?
Because it'd be boring. I didn't have an interesting childhood.
I don't agree with that. I think it's amazing how people really don't see themselves. I find pretty much everything Cater has to say interesting. I mean, if he spoke about his potty training, I'd probably find it interesting. I'm speaking of potty training. Babs is back. Babs, let's see how you sound. Babs, can you grunt first?
Do I sound clearer now?
You sound beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful, man. Beautiful.
Much better. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear. Is it all right if I move on to the next section of, I guess, the sort of general topic? Because all right. I'm curious to hear what your experience has been with, in terms of how your life has panned out personally in terms of dynamics, and also as a general matter in terms of where you think things presently stand in the Western world, let's just say America. What are your thoughts on status? And when I say status, I mean it in a Weberian sense, in the sense of Weber posited that there is class, party, and status. And party is sort of political affiliation or membership in that sense. And then class is an economic sort of like axis, as it were. And then you have status, which is basically the sort of cultural, social. It's a rather malleable concept, but it certainly is something that exists and very much influences how people see themselves and relate to others and perceive the world. And this isn't true for all people, but especially so in America. But I think that there are still aspects of status, social status, or social class, or whatever you want to call it, that very much manifest themselves even in the modern world today. And I'm curious to hear what all of your personal experiences have been in that regard. Has it caused you to feel resentful, or has it caused you to feel happy and fulfilled?
Okay, I'm going to jump in first and to give this order. So Babs is going to ask the questions, then I'll go first each session, then Brenda will go second, then Cater will go third, then Babs could weigh in and we can discuss amongst ourselves, but at least that will give us some ordering. So I think I've always been obsessed with status. The opposite of high status is humiliation, and everybody hates being humiliated. I think the drive for status is about the biggest drive there is after you meet your basic needs for survival. And I've always been keenly aware of where I stand in the social pecking order. And I find women are very keenly aware of that. Like, women know whether they are 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s. I mean, they know their worth on the sexual marketplace, and they carry themselves accordingly. For example, you can't neg 5s. Like, 5s are very insecure, but you can neg an 8 or a 9. So yeah, I've always been aware of status, and I've known the difference between, for instance, when I went on 60 Minutes, I had higher status for weeks afterwards. When, generally speaking, when I'd appear on the cover of a newspaper or magazine, I'd have increased status. When I was on TV, I'd have increased status. But sometimes the stories were quite negative, and then I noticed that there was no status bump. In fact, I felt even more vulnerable. So I know what it's like to walk into a room and nobody wants to talk to me. The people are kind of turning away from me. People are shunning me. Incredibly, incredibly, incredibly painful. And on the other hand, I know what it's like to walk into a room and people kind of gather around. People are excited and energized that I've stepped into the room. So I much rather have the latter experience than the former. Okay, Brindle.
Yeah, I would say I think that drive has affected me at different times in my life where perhaps I've been drawn to different social groups based on whether I would be, sort of the big man in the room kind of thing. Like, better to be the big fish in the small pond sometimes, at least for your ego's sake. Something sort of related. Yeah, Babs and I were talking on Analytical Chick stream earlier tonight, and we were talking about sort of, I guess it's class, but status plays into it. I always felt like sort of my family background has been upwardly mobile, but very recently, and so I had the intelligence and the educational opportunities to have an upper middle class life, whereas like culturally, I came from more of a working or lower middle class perspective, and I always found I always kind of felt like an imposter in the corporate world, where I wasn't really like a lot of the people that I worked with. Like, I didn't share kind of the same attitudes and I cultural mores or sensibilities and maybe attitude towards physical work and things like that. And I sort of, I think I kind of like had contempt for those people, and I never really felt at home in that environment. Cater?
Well,
Why?
again,
What made you feel uncomfortable? I'm curious. Quick follow-up.
Uncomfortable. Well, because I always felt like I was not a PC guy, and something about people in, like, I'm a very blunt person, and I don't really I don't tolerate kind of mincing words or like not being real about how you feel or what you think. And
one could say you tend towards the rebarbative.
sort of. That would be one way to put it. But I don't I don't like I don't like sort of the I guess just the way these people are. Like, I felt like there was a lot of fakeness. I didn't like share a lot of the same interests. Like, I don't know, I guess like even early on I always saw them as bug men, really. And I never really felt at home there. So I actually feel like being, running a construction site and sort of interacting like across all the classes. I mean, you have the owners who are multimillionaires, upper middle class people, that running the job, all the way down to working class, even working poor in the form of illegals. I like having access to like the whole breadth of society instead of just people who wear nice suits.
Well, you had mentioned
Wow.
that you always found them to be like bug men, and that's interesting because it reminds me of, and I assume that means you don't think they're particularly societally conducive to you and the people you like to be around. And this is something most people don't know, is that one of the most familial types of insects is actually the cockroach. They have very intense and intimate relations with other cockroaches, and they actually form bonds with other types of insects too. And what's really interesting about cockroaches is that the cockroaches, the young ones that form bonds with other insects, grow faster than the ones that are isolated and by themselves. But to answer Ed's question about no, status is not really something that I considered. I probably should have. It was never a motivating factor for what I did, and I never really cared about it much. I probably should, but I never did. No.
Well, what about like your? Do you not derive any pleasure from like recognition for your intellectual contributions?
Yeah, I do. It's just it's not the principal factor. But I mean, recognition is not necessarily status either. Somebody can really love something you do, but there has to be like a certain number of people that form a coherent group that then take you into that group and say, this work is really good and we're going to adopt something from it or talk about it a lot. So it's somebody just liking something that somebody else does is not necessarily emblematic of status itself.
Well, isn't it when a critical mass of people recognize your contribution that you've sort of achieved a status?
Well, that's one element to status, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this topic up with the panel tonight, is because it's such a nuanced and complex matter, status, because it can be defined in many different ways, and there is a subjective quality to it, but there also is kind of some things that are semi-objective to it within societies. For instance, certain types of contribution can raise one's status, but simply finding oneself in a certain milieu, or being born into a certain milieu, or being in a certain place, or simply
I would say that
yeah, status comes from many different areas, and there are lots of different things that people perceive as status in their own lives and externally.
right, but there was a second part to that, which was concerning America, right? If I remember, it's been a while since you first asked
America, the Western world, or the world in general today, as you live it and you experience it where you are. How does status manifest itself? I'm very curious about that because New York has a very interesting hierarchy, as does SF, although SF has a very different hierarchy. LA has, again, a very different type of hierarchy from either of the two aforementioned places, and so on and so
yeah,
forth.
there's two broad divides between the coastal cities, like the really metropolitan areas, have a hierarchy of status that is almost completely distinct from the rural areas, from the heartland and whatnot.
Well, there's a shorthand for status, and that's just how tall someone is. Like high status people tend to be tall and angular, and low status people tend to be squat.
Sometimes I've made the joke in the past that physiognomy is real, but you shouldn't take that to an extreme and then just look at some fat short guy and go, he's a buffoon inherently because he's short and fat. But
yeah, about 90% of the time you will be. I mean, look at the difference between David Beckham and Wayne Rooney. Obviously, David Beckham is aristocratic, and Wayne Rooney, is a working class yobbo.
Or Mickey Rooney. That's another good example.
Or Mickey Rooney.
What you said about why I feel like the quote bugmen are hostile towards people like me. I think that's actually pretty accurate, where I feel like I guess there is sort of like some level of resentment that like this kind of behavior is like what it takes to succeed, and I find it like antithetical to how I want to be in the world, and it's kind of infuriating.
Yeah, it's highly understandable. I mean, I felt that way occasionally, but it's just, when I'd see like an exclusive group of friends or whatnot that are always sort of, they'll talk to you, but they won't take you into it, they won't let you into the inside jokes and tell you when they're going to parties, that kind of thing. But then, if you survey their behavior as a whole and you think, well, actually, I really don't want to be a part of that kind of social milieu. So it's just, it depends upon whether or not you actually actively want to participate and become like those people.
How much of that is just post hoc rationalization, though, after being
Well,
rejected?
well, yeah, but I mean, you could say that about anything. How much of that is post hoc rationalization? I would say that it's not, I don't think I'm post hoc rationalization. Well, I mean, it has to be, you have to rationalize after it occurs. You can't do it before you understand what the social milieu
Well,
is. So,
well, that's true, but you could go to the social milieu, understand what it is, and be like, this is kind of dumb, but I'll still try to join anyway. Who cares? Like, even though I'll kind of half-ass it.
well, the
Or
way to
you
know
could go
is
in
whether,
and, yeah. Sorry, go
the
ahead.
way to know is whether or not somebody understands the social milieu that they're either being drawn towards or that they want to actively leave or exit out of or just repel or just not think about. So it's just just ask them, whether or not they understand it, then that'll tell you.
I guess like I just resent like how effete like the upper middle class and our elites like are and what's required. I mean, I think one of the things I really like about my current workplace is that there's not a lot of women around. And so there's a lot more
Sounds pretty sexist, dude.
well no, I find like
Do you just like hate women? Are you like afraid of women or something? Is your masculinity that fragile?
This chat
Read
is getting
more
a little
queer
too
theory.
heteronormative for me. I don't know if I can stick around. I might have to drop out here.
right. No, it's just that okay, so like I had in the past like I had like female managers and there may be like some issue there were issues where like they would feel my perception would be that they felt threatened by like the initiative I took like on different client engagements and things like that and how assertive I was with like the tax positions that I thought we could take and things like that and I was very good at finding different tax strategies that they hadn't found, and they'd been in it, 10 years longer than I had. And I think they took that much differently than like my male managers did. And they would never actually confront me directly. Like I would only ever find out about some issue in an indirect manner. And that used to infuriate me because it was like, I can take like whatever you're going to say to my face, but like to go sort of, I think we've talked about in the stream before, like the idea of like bringing other authorities in is like a very hostile act, and I don't like that about how my experience of how women operate in the workplace. Um, and I just find the all male environment like it's a lot more direct. Like you can blow off steam directly. There's not a lot of hurt feelings because it's just more logic based. I mean, obviously emotions get into it, anger gets expressed sometimes, but like things, it's done. Or they're done with you,
I
or you're
understand
gone.
that.
You know what I mean? Like if it's
Yeah,
such a big deal, like you're gone, you're fired, it's done. It's not going to fester.
right. I think most men can understand that, unless they're living in a very cloistered environment or have been brainwashed or something. But what I wanted to ask you was that you had started talking about these issues because of how effete and societally unconducive you thought the elites were. So I'm just curious
He's
what
talking
would be,
about you, basically.
I'm not an elite.
You too, Bev.
All right. Touche.
I
See,
kid. I'm not really
karma.
talking about. I'm really not talking about either one of you. I'm talking about. I mean, I'm
No,
talking
no.
about the way. I'm talking about the way like pundits on television react. Male pundits reacting to Trump's aggressive language and them getting their panties
Right,
in a bunch.
right.
Like, how dare we like act assertive in the world?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So, what would you like to see? Would you like to see more just masculine assertiveness? And if so, like what kind? You know, like a Trump or like a Clint Eastwood, or you know, what kind of vector of of being?
I mean, it doesn't have to be sort of the I don't know.
Stereotypical.
Well, it doesn't have to be like showmanship, a showman's machismo. You know what I mean? Like we don't have to
Yeah.
put it on. It doesn't have to be so affected. But yeah, I think particularly in masculine domains such as the military, foreign policy, politics in general, um, I think they I think they would function a lot better with a more masculine stance.
I would agree. I would
Interesting.
agree. But see, the problem here is just convincing people that that is a preferable way to take the country. Because, and this is especially true because the people that are going to be saying that are going to be assertive, typically more aggressive men. And so when they're trying to convince these people that are very, very milk toast, very passive, very empathic usually. They're just going to think, you know, you're a horrible sexist. You've got some kind of issues with women from your past, and that's the only reason you're doing it. And they'll psychoanalyze you, go all Freud on you, and then they'll just throw it out. And then it'll become a cycle because they'll dispense with what you say out of hand, and then you'll get angry. Well, not you specifically, but this kind of person will tend to get angry and then go shout at them, and then it's just a screaming match, which is you know what I see constantly on any of these online like debates that I see about this topic, or if they dip their toe into this topic and they're speaking with you know a feminist, especially the male feminists they seem to get more angry than the women do. Women are just like you know like rationalize it away, but the male feminists tend to go with the "you're a bad person" kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, but I think like that feminization. I mean, I don't. I mean, there's multiple factors that play into this, right? I mean, first of all, we gave women the vote, so now suddenly half the electorate automatically has a more feminine bend to it. Um, on top of it, we're basically sending people to indict. You know, more and more of the population is getting sent to leftist indoctrination camps called universities, where they're not. You know, like my jobs as a kid, like 15 onwards, like I worked on construction sites. I worked at a farm, places like that where there was, I worked with like in all male environments. I worked with my body,
You worked on a farm too. That's interesting.
and I found that like informed my, I guess, my expectations of like what a workplace would be like, perhaps, or
One of the other things it does, and I tell people this every time I get the opportunity, is it shows you that that kind of work is not something just for plebs. It's not just something that these buffoons do, and it's just so easy because you get this coastalite snobbery where they look at people that do agricultural work as some kind of brainless, witless exercise in brutality, which is dumb. You have to be really smart to run a farm. You have to be really smart to uh, even just manage a really sizable plot of land, even if you're just growing, you know, vegetables or something like that, and you want to sell them and have a business and whatnot. You can't be an idiot and do that. So it irritates me when people just kind of like dismiss out of hand as hicks or hill jacks, all like half of the electorate or half of this, you know, state. It's very unhelpful, and it's usually born out of complete and utter false stereotypes. And yes, most stereotypes are usually true, but this is one of the ones that isn't.
yeah. No, I
Oh,
go ahead, Babs.
no, go ahead.
No, you go, please. I wasn't gonna say anything useful.
No, I just wanted to say, oh, don't say that. I mean, maybe. Well, you know better than me. But I wanted to say high status opinions
you need to take into account the fact that in every age there are opinions that are like high status opinions or good person opinions
They're
or
approved for
smart
consumption.
person opinions, and people generally conform to sort of whatever society lays out to some degree. So I think a lot of people, especially in certain social circles where conformity is highly valued and being, keeping up with certain trends, whether it's in an intellectual manner or a moral manner, is very, very important. A high status opinion is something that people will even if they don't authentically feel it, they'll will themselves to believe it almost in a capacity. Also, I wanted to say there's a really good question in the chat for me by John615, and I'm going to respond to it in a moment. But first, I just have a question for you, Brundlefly, but also for the other people here. You were talking about farm work, and I know that Mr. Ford, you at some points when you were younger did work that required more sort of physical labor or things like that. And I was talking to Philiter about this recently, or not even physical labor, but let's say, for example, working in construction, doing something that isn't, let's say, either certain types of white collar work or academic work. People I feel like there's kind of a bias that I think is really interesting, where even if someone is, let's say, a skilled tradesperson or like a foreman at a construction site, or even some type of person who, it depends. There are all sorts of things, but people who generally tend to do more physical things, they often tend to be more looked down upon by even, let's say an academic or a worker at some white collar job or at a law firm, who might even if that person, let's say, makes less than them, there is a bit of snobbery going on there between career disciplines. Do any of you pick up on the same thing that I'm talking about here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I remember I went back to Australia for a year after high school, and even taking a year off of high school to work without going to college was a low status thing. Then one of the jobs I took was as a cleaner at a shopping center. So that included cleaning the toilets. And this was 1984, and I was making about $25 an hour. And by comparison, when I came back to California and worked, I was making $4 an hour. So I was earning good money, but it was very low status. My brother told me, he was a real estate agent at the time. He said, if you get sick, I can't step in for you. I mean, I can't be seen, cleaning toilets. And I remember I would used to try to clean the gum off the sidewalks, and my friends would be walking by. But Australia is about the best place in the world to be an average bloke. So that it wasn't nearly as humiliating in Australia to be doing manual labor as it was when I came back to America. I started working construction, and I loved part of it because it was like one of the most manly things I'd ever done. My muscles got bigger and stronger, got in really good shape. And I enjoyed doing something completely different and going in a new direction in my life. But I did keenly feel the loss of status. And I remember I was working in landscaping, and I remember working on college apartments. And the kids didn't relate to me by and large. And I was just nothing to them. And I just never forget the abject humiliation of that, of being a manual laborer around college kids, when I thought of myself as every bit as smart as any of these college kids, but to them, I didn't even register because I was a manual laborer.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a very similar experience. I mean, first, I just want to say, one thing I realized working in construction is that the guys who do it, it can take a decade to become really competent at any one of these jobs. At least as long as it takes anybody, when you count their college years and getting into a career. I mean, the amount of training and skill that goes into a skill, what a skilled tradesman has is really valuable. I mean, and not everyone can do it. I mean, there's a lot of thinking and problem solving, particularly in trades like carpentry, that I saw, by comparison. I mean, there were so many so many corporate bodies that were really, they just, they wore a suit well and they socialized well, but they weren't even really that bright.
They really didn't serve a function. Most of these guys that I've seen, because I've worked in factories, and there'll be these corporate executives that'll come in who are, upper management, but they don't do anything. They just walk around and they look. They don't speak to anybody. They leave. I'm like, what is your purpose? You're not even taking notes, right? You just come in and like, look at my suit, right? So they just don't serve a purpose. And there's a certain concentration in these higher level jobs when their companies are really efficient, where they just don't have enough jobs for the people to do unless it's something that's considered low status. Like, well, I could go down and be useful by working on the assembly line, but I'm not going to do that. That's for schmoes. And so that's that kind of attitude.
Yeah, and I will say though that the fact is like these guys, the reason that the manual laborer is not paid as well as a white collar person is because typically, now this like sort of ignores like middle management types and sort of like corporate filler job types, but someone who can organize people is worth 100 men. I mean, really. I mean, he may not even do that much work, but the ability to organize and coordinate activity of multiple people and resources is the most valuable skill, right? I mean, it's the thing that if you didn't have that guy, the economy would fall to pieces. And so I understand why those types are compensated the most. And I will say, to Luke's story, when I first got back into when I first went back into construction 2 years ago, in the first month there was a day where I had to like get down and dirty. I mean, we had to get this house all cleaned up because they were moving in. It was all hands on deck situation, and I was a mess. And I remember at lunchtime we were in a Tony neighborhood, and I walked down the street to go pick up Chipotle for everybody. And I am filthy. I'm in, a t-shirt, jeans, and boots. And there's all these guys, lawyer types, nice shoes. I have $400 shoes too. They're in my closet now. But I'm just standing there and I'm thinking like the humiliation of feeling like, wow, I'm like at the same, people look at me almost like at the same level as like the illegal immigrant relative to these guys, whereas I'm the same as them in a sense. Like no one would be able to tell my education level or the things I've done in corporate America. And that was a very dark day. I wasn't quite sure I was doing the right thing, but I got over that, and I'm much happier for it.
Yeah, I just want to cut in here. So there's somebody in the chat that said my take on corporate executives, some of them not doing anything, was a low IQ analysis. So I want to say that guy that I'm talking about got fired for not doing his job. So it's not because he wasn't doing his job.
No, but the role itself, really. Like, how do you feel about the role itself of those people? The suits class, as it were.
Well, I know that's not something I oppose. That's very important, like oversight, like what Brundlefly was talking about, that you need coordinators and you also need people taking memos and whatnot. You need that kind of infrastructure for these large-scale organizations.
It just seems their ranks are a little swollen right now.
Okay, guys, I'm going to say something that will forever change your life. What you have to do is listen and understand what I'm saying. High IQ people like ourselves think that we can stand out against the current. But guess what? We are buffeted by the current. We think that we can walk into Chipotle, looking like a mess, and that we will be immune from the social consequences, that it won't get to us. We think that we can work construction and we won't be bothered by appearing to be low status. Or we think that we can buck all sorts of trends, but really our room for freedom of movement, for free choice, is considerably more restricted than what we imagine. We're all subject to tremendous outside forces. And if you engage in low status behavior, you will feel the drop in your status, and as your status drops, your hold on life drops. You can say, oh, it's fine to be poor. Now you can say, hey, I'm Cater, I write for intellectual reasons. But if you ever feel your status dropping, you're getting that much closer to the edge and to death. Poverty is death, isolation is death, low status is death. And we can think that we're powerful intellectuals who are beyond such things, but we're not. Our room to maneuver is not nearly as large as we think we are. And we are affected by the same currents of status and social standing that affect everyone else, including the 95% of humanity who are less intelligent than us.
Sure, but you have to have some people who are willing to sacrifice everything. I think there always comes a point in time when you have to have people that are willing to put themselves completely on the line and be destroyed. You know, whether it's figuratively or literally, like literally killed or martyred for some kind of important cause. So yeah, that's generally true, and it's dangerous when people don't recognize that it's true. But there's always going to be a point in time where a group of people will call upon their exemplars to give themselves fully for a cause.
You know, in other words, I guess stay in your current. But no,
Stay
Luke,
in
I
your
think
lane, Goy, basically.
Is that the new stay in the lane?
stay in your current. well, you know, I think Luke's right in a degree that, you know, I had to, for instance, in my own life, I had to reconcile the fact that I was really not, you know, time had gone on. I was approaching 30. Like the choices I could have made, like really, I didn't belong in corporate America. I probably should have done something either in the sciences or academia, like much more of an ideas person than like a corporate animal. But I also have this need for like a physical outlet. You know, being able to manage construction projects mean I get to be on my feet most of the day. And, you know, if there's some short-term trade-off in status, you know, as my income, you know, dip down, I mean, I have to deal with that. But the other thing is like, I also have to be, I have to be happy. And like the paycheck is not the only thing. There's more to job satisfaction than your paycheck. It's gotta fit your personality. And your and your lifestyle.
Well, you
Yeah,
could also have a job that's.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to respond to Monique, because Monique has two questions that he's been trying to ask in the chat for some time now. Hold on 1 second.
There's one about usury he's been pushing.
Yeah. That's a. We can get to that in a moment. But he has two questions. The first of which is one that's personally addressed at me, and I'm going to read it now. It says, can you talk about how you feel when you find yourself outclassed? And then he said outstatused. All right, so I guess status in the sense that you're using it, you're probably not using it in the specific term. You're probably using it in like the broad sense of like in all factors. So economically speaking, I've never really worried about that, because honestly, I mean, I'm just kind of one of those weird people who wouldn't really mind living in a semi-ascetic lifestyle. I'm not very much attached to necessarily to material wealth, and perhaps that is a byproduct of ignorance, of never having known what it's actually like to be in a situation where I felt like I guess I was economically lacking, even though I don't have much money at all to myself. It's just that I've never really depended. I've never really been. I mean, I have, but that's not true. I have been self-sufficient for periods of time, but it was always semi-aided self-sufficiency. So it wasn't really true self-sufficiency. There were always aspects of it that weren't truly self-sufficient. So that's the economic thing. In terms of status, social status, I've always been, in terms of like peer groups and just natural social dynamics, how they play out. Usually I'm sort of like, I'm fairly agreeable, but I'm usually kind of like mid-status, because I'm agreeable, but kind of lower status because, well, it depends on the group, honestly. But like a lot of times I'm lower status because I'm sort of like autiste, not annoying, but like, I'm kind of like off in my own little world. Not clearly as much as like I am when I get on stream, but like, I sort of do my own stuff. I was always sort of more interested in like academic stuff than like talking about like TV shows or, whatever's cool. So I'm always sort of socially out of step. So that kind of brings me out of things. But I mean, I don't know. So socially, I guess it's sort of a mixed bag. I've never really had, until fairly recently in my life, like within the past maybe like 4 years or so, I never really had any friend groups that I was a part of. I just had a lot of individual friendships. So I don't know. But yeah, when I was in like prep school and preschool and stuff, I was like low status because I was like the like nerd and like, I wasn't like I wasn't cool because I didn't like kill insects or like sports or I don't know what they like Transformers and Power Rangers. I think
I hated those
social
guys.
references.
Those guys that would
Except
like
my
catch
parents forbade me from watching those shows. They only let me watch Animal Planet, like Discovery Channel.
No, I mean the
Channel,
people.
so.
Yeah, I'm talking about the people that would like catch dragonflies and pull their wings off just because
Yeah.
they
No,
wanted to
but the
see it
bug
slowly
killers were
die.
like the cool kids. The bug killers were, and like I remember that was sort of the divide. And I was always the one who was like, "Don't kill the insects," because I did kill an insect once and I hated it, and ever since then But anyway, in terms
really
of,
this
but
question.
there's one more question. He says about how I feel and that was about how, and this is the third aspect of class, and this is sort of like social class. The only, and I guess as it were, and just sort of due to my, I guess, family background, that isn't really a place where I ever feel, not that I'm necessarily pompous about it, but, or I didn't even really know much about it, but I never really worried in that capacity, just because I feel like my family is so rapidly downwardly mobile. If you look at like the past, let's say 70 years or to 100 years or something like that, it's like gone from so much to so little within at least my specific branch of the family, relatively speaking. It's like I never really care about it because I like in terms of the asset thing, I never really cared about that because I feel like there's sort of this ephemeral quality. I do feel outclassed when I go to Europe. Like, for instance, I was at the Henley Regatta a few years ago visiting some of my family in England, and like there were people there who actually had like titles and whatnot. So me, I'm just like some American, I'm just some commoner. And like even the Rothschilds, didn't they sort of like buy their title or something like that? I mean, I don't know. But then again, doesn't sort of a lot of people. But anyway, the second question is this. And this is, why is everyone so anxious about it? Like, what do you fear, or something like that? And or like, why are you asking this question? The reason why I asked this question is because I noticed a specific current, sort of running through a lot of your individual casts, Luke. And this seemed to be a lot of talk about social status on all levels and economic status. And I thought that this was really a really interesting undercurrent that I kept seeing surfacing again and again. So I thought it might be interesting to just sort of like openly have a discussion like this with you and a lot of the other people here, because I think that you have a lot of really interesting, insightful perspectives on that. Your life has had a lot of interesting contrasts and what do you call it? Things that are not necessarily like not dualities. Idiosyncrasies. I just find it very interesting. Yeah.
See, I don't believe people like Gator who say that they're not obsessed with status. I just don't believe there are more than 1% of the population who is not obsessed with status.
Well, I'm certainly not obsessed with it. I take it into consideration from time to time, but it's not a main motivating factor. And
how do you like?
If you just what?
How do you like being publicly humiliated?
Well, I mean, I don't like being publicly humiliated, but I really don't it's not something that occurs, frequently enough for me to think, well, this is a big problem and I gotta climb some ladder somewhere to fix it. So it's just, I think most people are too anxious about their status, because the improvement for civic virtue is, I think, more laudable and preferable for a society. As a reason to motivate someone to improve themselves, as opposed to, I just want people to venerate me, and that's why I'm going to improve myself, right?
Status is life. If you're low status, if you walk into a room and people turn away from you, you're going to want to die. You're going to want to kill yourself.
Okay, I might want to die, but I might still be correct and know that those people are incorrect. That's more important.
It's not going to matter. Like, you think you're immune to the currents of status that swirl around you. And rather than me saying stay in your current, I'm saying the very opposite. I'm saying that none of us are immune to the currents that swirl around us. And if you were to keep walking into rooms that where people turned away from you, you would feel horrible. And
Yeah,
it would,
I'm willing to.
It would exert a downward pull on your life.
I tell you what, Luke, I'm willing to be destroyed by these currents. I will give myself over to them completely. I'll let them tear me into pieces, but I'm not going to let them move me in a direction that I think is incorrect. And that's more important.
Really? So there's nothing that you say or do that is simply to maintain your status rather than it comes out of what you authentically believe is right?
No, there are things, yes, certainly, but that's not preferable. I don't view that as a preferable way to be. And if I notice that I'm doing something just to achieve status for its own sake, then I try to turn away from it, because there should be a reason underlying and undergirding that move towards a higher position. First and foremost, I should be worthy of actually having that position, not just like I schemed and I got it.
Good point from Holly Rourke, the attorney in the chat. Tell Cater to turn on his camera then if status does not matter.
And she also earlier in the chat said status is important. I grew up on welfare and did everything I could to improve my status, which is an interesting.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Yeah.
Oh my god! You're gonna make me turn my fucking camera on?
No, Bruno, we don't care about you.
I haven't.
Oh my god!
Recently.
Cater, I thought you were like an elephant man, but
Really?
you don't have any obvious deformities.
I don't think so. No.
You're not fat either.
No, I try to stay in shape. Yeah.
I thought you were like fat and hideous.
Well, thanks, Luke. So how's he thought I was a woman? You thought I was fat and hideous. What is wrong with you people?
I wonder if status means different things, like in different contexts. Like I'm actually wondering.
It does. It absolutely does. That's why it's so interesting. It's very multifaceted. Go ahead.
Right. So like my understanding is like a traditional Orthodox thing is like the man stays home and studies Torah, right? So it couldn't possibly
status
be.
comes from wisdom. Status comes from wisdom or scholarship within a lot of more pious Jewish communities in some instances, but there also are aspects of lineage or clan playing out there as well.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, I think maybe what Luke's getting to is like a socioeconomic status is his definition of.
No, not at all. As a playwright, let me tell you, if you're a playwright, you make your living as a playwright in Los Angeles in a lot of circles. You will get mega status, even if you're only making $40,000 a year. You'll get more status, generally speaking, as a playwright making $40,000 a year than as a secretary making $100,000 a year.
Yeah, see, this is the thing, and this is my question for you, Mr. Ford, but also for the other people here. Would you rather be borderline aristocratic or low aristocracy / very, very old money in the context of a place like America or a colonial setting, or living in a state of ascetic borderline poverty, but still, being able to live comfortably in, let's say, a house with, like maybe a room, a bathroom, like a little cabin, and you have all your needs provided for and can always eat enough and you have internet, but you just the basics. Would you rather have that, or would you rather be not even new money? Let's say, would you rather be a lottery winner, or
I'd rather be a video. I'd rather be a video streamer making $40,000 a year than a secretary making $130,000 a year.
No, yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, that's right. Interesting. But would you rather be the sort of?
I'd rather be aristocratic than not aristocratic.
But not aristocratic and living a life of unfathomable wealth.
Oh, if you completely,
which would you choose? The unfathomable wealth?
I choose
nouveau wreath, unfathomable wealth.
Yeah, I choose unfathomable wealth over poverty and aristocracy.
Yeah,
interesting. I think that's interesting because I guess, I'm obviously biased. I wouldn't consider myself in any capacity aristocratic. Again, like Greg Johnson said on this podcast, this is America. But I would much rather be cultured and of good upbringing and of good repute in that capacity and part of that social strata than I would, because I would just feel like, I feel like I would, in the latter setting, I wouldn't have access to as quality of people as in the former, among other things. And I think that would leave me feeling sad and lonely.
Well, but imagine like the state of melancholy you'd be in. I mean, it's better. like if you were this had an aristocratic lineage and or pedigree, and yet you've fallen so far, you're basically the penniless aristocrat. You sort of like have this sense of what you could have had or what you used to have, um, and that sense of loss will get at you. I mean, it's the it's the no longer having something that really hurts versus not never having it at all.
That's a really good point. Oh, my turn. Okay, so Diogenes is my hero. So yeah, I don't. Poverty would be fine to me, insofar as that. Yeah, material wealth is very low on my list of considerations. Yeah.
Do you want to get married and have kids, Cater?
Well, I never said that I wasn't, or I never said anything about that.
I'm just curious. Do you want to get married and have children?
I don't. That's not a portion of my life that I would like to put out in the public.
Yeah, I would like I mean I would like to have enough money that my wife didn't have to work and she could just pump out babies. I mean, that would be an ideal situation. Unfortunately, I just don't have the temperament for what I chose my career coming out of college. I find the corporate world alienating, and so I sort of like I'm sort of like deep into her childbearing years, having to like retool and take it a different direction.
Okay, so 10 out of 10, like, or 0 out of 10, how important is status to you? So on a 0 to 10, with 10 being most important, I would put status at a 10 for me. How about you, Cater?
Sorry, I was having trouble. The thing was freezing. Wouldn't let me open the mic. So it's a 1 to 10, right?
Yeah.
1 to 10. How important is status? I guess overall it would. That's difficult putting a number to. It's difficult. I don't know, about 5, I think.
And Brundle, on a 1 to 10, how important is status to you?
7, 8, 9, something like that. I mean, it's not the most important thing, but I'd be lying if it doesn't matter to me.
And Babs, on a 1 to 10, how important is status to you?
Interesting. Probably like a 9. Probably like a 9.
Yeah, see,
Probably like a 9.
for people
Maybe
who
higher.
frequently experience social humiliation, as I have, status is of primo importance. And I'll give you an analogy. I had a girlfriend who was very successful economically. In the bedroom, she wanted to be totally dominated. I have rarely been successful economically. In the bedroom, I've always wanted to dominate, because the bedroom was my substitute was the way I dealt with failing in the wider world. So, in bed, I had to be, really, the king. So for someone who's experienced so much social humiliation as I have, who've had all his friends turn against him, who's been ostracized and expelled from so many communities that were of great meaning to him, who grew up in foster care and moved around from home to home to home, who then was moving throughout childhood. That's my reaction to this constant sense of loss, which has constituted my life. This constant sense of everything being taken away from me and being feeling alone and small in a big world. So yeah, I compensate for that by admitting I'm a 10 out of 10 on the status chasing scale.
How much have those experiences shaped the narrative of your later life, to come back full circle to what we were originally talking about?
Yeah, 100%.
Do you have a desire?
Dominant.
Do you have a desire to shift your perspective or continue to use those narratives?
Yeah, I found 12-step gave me a sense of peace. So right now, I can confess 10 out of 10, and let's just say, I've just rhetorically overstated it. I think anyone who's known me will say that I have a far greater sense of peace than ever before, and far more inner resources, that I'm far better to take care of myself, far better to put an end to people taking advantage of me or abusing me, to insisting that people treat me respectfully, and choosing good people in my life. So I think I've made a lot of progress, and that's enabled me to be so honest as to say I very strongly want to avoid humiliation, and zero status equals public humiliation.
Interesting. All right. By the way, I didn't mean to like rudely imply that you hadn't made progress. Let's say it just seems like at the very least there are sort of like, as you said yourself a moment ago, sort of vestiges of that prior way of thinking, regardless of whether it's quote correct or not. Objectively speaking, one could argue that for hours on end. What's going through your mind right now, Luke? I'm curious.
I just think this. Oh, I'm sorry. You're asking Luke. Go ahead, Luke.
Nothing. I think I'm just here, present in the moment. I'm okay with saying I really don't want to be socially humiliated and isolated again, and that's something that's important to me. Even when I speak out on very controversial issues under my real name with my real face, I still don't want to be thrown away like in the past. Cater, what were you saying?
Well, I was just going to say that that's an eminently reasonable thing to want to do, but too much fixation on these kind of issues or on traumas from the past, or not even traumas, but just personal upsets, gets people into another kind of loop, and then you just you self-traumatize yourself. I don't mean you particularly, but I've seen people I know do this where because they're so intensely afraid of something recurring, something bad that happened in the past, they'll just mentally torture themselves, constantly thinking about it, reliving it, worrying about it, and it really degrades their quality of life. So that's something I think people should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, the way to a happy life is a life of service. So people should notice that when I bring guests onto the show, I treat them respectfully. Like, the more comfort we have, the more I'll rib them. But I'm very nice when I bring guests on. I don't want to degrade and publicly humiliate people, unlike the internet blood sports. I stay away from that type of behavior, and I try to live a life of love and service. I work a lot of hours, but I also do a lot of volunteering. And I find that the more that I focus my life on being of service to other people, then the less likely I am to fall into these very traumatic loops that Cater was just talking about. The less likely I am to kind of get lost in my own personal hurts and self-obsessions. I'm just much happier when I'm outward directed.
No, that's a great point. I find I'm at my worst when I'm ruminating too much, when I'm not engaged with other people. Like, if I had a situation today, I had an argument with my wife. I got really pissed off, and I was sitting on it, from noon to like 4 o'clock, and then I ended up a friend of mine called, and I got it off my chest. I felt a lot better. I mean, talking through something. I mean, I even feel it like when we're talking about politics. Like, when I would go on poll and I'd see some meme and I'd see the comments and I would get black-pilled and all pissed off. I had a much more negative mental state than when I'm able to come on here and engage those ideas in the format of a discussion.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, by the way, sorry if I'm ever like disrespectful or try to goad or prod people when I'm on here. It's just sort of part of my nature, and I'm the same way in person. And the only reason I do this is because I want to, when I come onto these shows, like, I'm not a very really, I don't think I'm that interesting of a person. I have some interesting ideas or ideologies and whatnot that I subscribe to, but I'm not that interesting. But everyone who comes on the Luke Ford show generally is quite interesting, and I like to sort of bring out
the aspects of themselves that they might not necessarily as readily share in, let's say, in real life with someone in person, even with a therapist. Because in a context like this, because there is a degree of removal and we can sort of intellectualize these things, I think that it's kind of like allows people to have a conversation with themselves and not necessarily find things out more about themselves because they might already know these things, but sort of articulate them, put words to them, and be able to like analyze them perhaps in a different light. I think
This is all getting a little
yeah.
touchy-feely for me. I'm going to have to leave.
I affirm you for taking
You're the homonormative guy. It's too touchy-feely for you?
No, I'm the heteronormative guy who's studying the homonormative guys. Right? Get it? Don't get it twisted, Brundle. All right?
I don't know. You are what you do.
That's only partly true. That's an oversimplification of reduction, I would say. But I actually am going to leave. Where did Luke go? I was gonna sign off, but oh, there he is. I honestly didn't see you drop down. Yeah, I'm gonna take off. I've got a bunch of other stuff I have to do, but it's always a pleasure coming on and talking to all of you gentlemen. So thank you very much, and I hope we can talk again sometime.
Thanks, Cater.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Cater.
That guy's awesome. He's so smart. I mean, just so many layers to what he has to say and so much wisdom for guys 27 years of age. Unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Good dude. And if you like his stuff, check out the Logos Club, which is where he writes. By the way, I wanted to say earlier, when I was answering the question about is status important to me, I'd like to say that this isn't merely something about in terms of me and my own life, but it's also how I perceive myself sort of in relation to others. For instance, when I am in the presence of someone who is far more cultured or sort of like in some capacity intellectually superior to me or far more learned or knowledgeable than I am in either a specific field or generally, I put myself in a position of deference to them. I make respect. I have always passively, but I currently kind of actively make respecting hierarchy in all aspects of life a very kind of important part of my life and how I conduct myself. And yeah, while sometimes I do get a little bit standoffish and cocky for someone who says that, generally I try to sort of like show deference for people who I perceive to be sort of like.
Your audio sucks, Babs. Is there anything you can do about it?
Yes, better.
He's better now. Get closer to the phone.
All right. Okay.
Babs, I was going to say to that point, I know the feeling because a lot of the guests that come on here, like even yourself, for instance, or have read a lot more than I have. So you guys like make reference to different authors or different ideas where I don't have the same depth of knowledge. So I think I tend to like hang back on like some of those areas because I know I'll just get BTFO'd if I try to wade in there.
I mean, I guess everyone has those topics. That's the reason why I don't talk about geopolitics. I generally only argue about things purely based on pathos and not really expecting to quote win an argument, but just sort of stating my opinions and asserting them. Or B, I do it when there are facts there to 100% bolster and lead to what I'm saying. I won't try to like factually argue a point that I'm weak on or that isn't fully supported. I really choose my battles in that capacity, probably because I don't like losing. But
no, that's a great point. Like going the pathos route, I tend to do that. Like empty rhetoric.
Yeah, precisely. It's quite enjoyable.
What does the pathos route mean? Is that like the Hershey Highway?
No, it's just like
it's like me when I'm arguing for polygamy on this show.
Okay.
It's like emotional appeals.
Oh yeah. It's the gay thing.
Hey, so Babs, Babs, can I?
Go
this
ahead.
Is something I wrote down in my phone the other day. I was driving. I pulled over. I was listening to this Frame Game video, and I thought of you because he was talking about one of the reasons he's opposed to immigration is that he's someone who thinks that America's been good for Jews, right? And he sees like Jews pushing for third world immigration, which will inevitably result in Jews being driven out of the diaspora into Israel. The example being the French situation, where we're seeing mass immigration from France to Israel. And I'm wondering, I know you think the diaspora has been bad for Jews. Why don't you support third world immigration if it would drive Jews out of the diaspora?
Because when I look at the diaspora, I say, wouldn't it be a shame if this happened not just to my people, but to anyone else? I wouldn't wish social atomization or that's caused by things, or just I wouldn't wish group conflict upon any two groups of people, which is sort of inherent when you have this zero-sum game, as it were, which happens when you have two groups in a country, whether it's like a minority diaspora group or two neighboring ethnic groups in one nation state, or a slew of immigrants or something like that. I don't want anyone to have to lose touch with their culture, their traditions, their ancestors, their identity, etc. I wouldn't want anyone to become sort of spiritually emaciated. I wouldn't want anyone to lose entire segments and facets of their society, like farmers, warriors, people who work the land, tradespeople, etc. Losing facets of your society is a tragic thing to happen to a civilization, because a civilization is a full spectrum. We need it all, you know.
Well, but I guess even in the terms you're speaking, I think you recognize that I guess you recognize that groups matter. You recognize that groups have an interest. I mean, what about Jews' interests? I mean, do you not have a Jewish ethnocentrism where, I mean, wouldn't it be good for your people to get driven out of the diaspora? I mean,
yeah, it would, but would I want that at the expense of? At the expense of other civilizations getting destroyed? Because I just think, what if that was happening to me? I mean, yes, I do have ethnocentrism, and yes, I do have preference for my own group, but I also, I can't fundamentally, just growing up in the context that I did, in the context that I am, and there's probably sort of the fact that I belong to kind of a certain neurotype. I think that I do kind of belong to a left wing or liberal kind of humanist type neurotype mentally in a lot of ways. Like, for instance, communism is where I originally started out, politically speaking, not libertarianism, which is usually the first kind of ideology that people adopt. It's for me, it's I understand why any people wouldn't want to lose their indigenous land, or be beset by misery, or become sort of wandering nomads against their will. It's just and why would I want to destroy a civilization? It's I don't like to. As I was saying earlier in the conversation, I didn't like to kill bugs when I was a kid. If I'm not going to kill an earthworm, I'm not going to advocate the doom of an entire civilization. That just seems incredibly mean. I don't know.
And I didn't mean to imply that you would. I just had that thought.
Because some people do. I don't care if you did imply that. I wouldn't care. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to think. There are some people who do advocate such things, but it's just, and there are some people who solely just say my people first before anything else. But I do have these humanistic urges and impulses. I have this latent enlightenment conditioning, as it were, or maybe it's just being a person with a certain moral outlook. I don't know.
That's a great answer. Thank you for answering that.
Okay, so let's do final words. Babs, final words for tonight, and we'll continue this discussion another night.
This was a phenomenal stream. I'm sorry if I asked a lot of you gentlemen for big personal and emotional contributions today. I affirm your speaking. You can take the folding chairs and line them up against the wall in the corner of the room, and we're going to meet again next Wednesday. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks, Babs. And Brindle, final words from you.
Yeah, no, to Babs' point about big emotional, I think probably true for a lot of people, at least for me, it's probably easiest to talk about myself as the subject I know best. It's really not a problem. I like these kind of conversations. I'm glad we keep getting Babs on. Cater is a great new addition to the show. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Brundlefly14, and we'll talk to you tomorrow night.
Bye-bye.